Mending fences. India's prime minister visits Washington. Tear gas backfires. Crowds build after China's government tries to break up Hong Kong protests. The elderly honored. Pope Emeritus Benedict joins Pope Francis at a mass for grandparents. And from godless to godly. A former atheist journey to Catholicism. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, September 29th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. It's a relationship that's been a little bit complicated recently, but tonight the leader of the free world and the leader of the world's largest democracy meet for the first time. Jason Calvi is at the White House tonight with more on the president's invited guest.
Brian, India's prime minister leads a country of 1.2 billion people. The two countries, the U.S. and India, have had their conflicts in the past, but by inviting the prime minister here to the White House, both parties looking to put the past in the past and start fresh.
A sold-out audience, 18,000 packing into New York's Madison Square Garden on Sunday. It's not a rock star they're waiting to see, but this man, India's new Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He's the leader of the BJP, a party that promotes Hindu nationalism. But in 2005, Modi wasn't even able to travel to the U.S. His visa was revoked. As a State Department spokesman explained at that time,
the person in question did not qualify for a visa given his involvement in, or not his involvement, but given the findings of Indian commissions in investigating actions or lack of actions by state institutions in religious conflict in Gujarat state.
The spokesman was referring to riots in 2002 when Hindu mobs rampaged Muslim neighborhoods, leaving more than 1,000 people, mostly Muslims, dead. At the time Modi was governor of Gujarat state, he was accused of not doing enough to stop the violence. Modi denied involvement. Years later, India's Supreme Court ruled there was no case to bring against him. But some of the controversy remains today, seen in the protests that greeted Modi outside of his Sunday speech in New York. Now Modi is his country's leader on the world stage, speaking at the UN on Saturday, and also meeting business leaders from tech firms like Google and manufacturers like Caterpillar and General Electric. He wants U.S. companies to make their products in India. And in Washington, he'll meet with President Obama. Today, the White House says the two countries work together to advance common goals.
Whether it's security and counterterrorism, or strengthening the economy, or a host of other regional issues, that there is a broad framework where India and the U.S. work closely together to advance our shared interests.
And Prime Minister Modi will have dinner right here at the White House tonight with President Obama. He'll meet again with the president in the Oval Office tomorrow. He'll also have lunch with the Secretary of State and Vice President. And I should add that right now Prime Minister Modi is fasting for religious reasons, just drinking water, lemon-flavored water. But the White House says they're going to accommodate their guest requests. Brian?
All right, Jason Calvi at the White House, and Dr. Benjamin Hopkins specializes in South Asia at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. Dr. Hopkins, how does this trip change things? How does it mark a shift in U.S.-India relations?
Well, I think it shows an interest on the part of Modi and his government to re-engage the United States very quickly. I mean, he's just been in office a couple of months, so the fact that one of his first foreign trips is here to the United States is a real indication of the value of that relationship to his government.
Give us a very quick profile. Why is this such a controversial leader?
Well, Modi was the prime minister or the chief minister of the state of Gujarat in West India, and in 2002 there were large riots there that led to a pogrom of over 1,000 Muslims and Sikhs who were killed. Modi is thought to have been at least, if not complicit, then somehow to blame for this violence. He has been cleared in this Indian Supreme Court, but nonetheless, there's still people that consider him responsible for what happened in 2002.
So he is a Hindu. How do the religious minorities in India view him?
Given the history of rioting in a state he was chief minister of and the sectarian nature of that rioting, very uncomfortable, I think is fair to say.
Well, as we saw, there's some protesters outside Madison Square Garden, but as a rule, he's been largely received positively by American people from India. Why is that, Indian Americans?
That's a great question, and it goes to his electoral support. His electoral support and that of his party, the BJP, which is on the right of Indian politics, really draw their support from upper caste, middle and upper class people. And those are by and large, the people that have emigrated to the United States in the past 30 and 40 years. So there's broad-based support for the BJP and its agenda amongst the Indian diaspora here in the United States. But it's not uniform, and that's why you see these protests popping up here, and I suspect as well in Washington tonight as he's here to visit.
So this visit with the president, what is in this for the U.S. in terms of international politics?
Well, as the U.S. is looking to disengage specifically from Afghanistan, I think they're looking to cement a regional partnership with India to kind of hand over a lot of responsibility there, at least in strategic terms. As well, India is a rising power, as it were, and will continue to rise well into the 21st century. And given the United States' interest in Asia, they're natural bedfellows, as it were, in the sense that they have a lot of common interest managing the rise of China, issues about terrorism and such. And so I think that what you will see as well on the American side is a willingness to re-engage with that Indian relationship.
Let's address Afghanistan very briefly. They have a new president, Ashraf Ghani, and of course this agreement is pretty much assured that several thousand troops will remain there after the deadline. What do Afghans make of this?
That has yet to be seen. I mean, this is no surprise that Ghani has signed or that this deal has come together so quickly. When Karzai refused to sign it, it was thought that he would leave this for his successor. In terms of indigenous Afghan reaction to the continued presence of American troops there, I think it depends on what exactly those troops are there to do. If it's a narrow counterterrorism mission, then I think there will be different set of issues as opposed to perhaps a counterinsurgency. So it really depends on with what mandate those American troops stay in the country.
Time will tell. From George Washington University, Dr. Benjamin Hopkins, thanks for joining us tonight. And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Liberia's president made a rare public appearance earlier today. She updated that country on the fight against Ebola. As an example of ways to prevent Ebola's spread, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf washed her hands with chlorinated water before the parliament session. Then she briefed lawmakers on a plan to contain the Ebola virus. In recent weeks, Sirleaf was only ventured out to meet with Parliament and deliver her State of the Union address. Liberia is one of the countries hardest hit by the biggest outbreak of Ebola ever. The virus has now claimed more than 3,000 lives. Another American doctor is being monitored for Ebola near Washington, D.C. The doctor arrived at the National Institutes of Health yesterday after being exposed to Ebola while working in Sierra Leone. NIH issued a statement saying that an abundance of caution was used when admitting the patient. 4 other Americans infected with Ebola while in West Africa have now been treated here in the U.S. 3 have recovered. 1 remains hospitalized. Charges will be filed in Oklahoma City against a man suspected of beheading one woman and stabbing another. 30-year-old Alton Nolan was shot and wounded and apprehended after allegedly attacking 2 women at Vaughn Foods Distribution Center in Oklahoma City last week. He had just been fired from his job there. One woman was beheaded, another was stabbed. Nolan and the stabbing victim remain in the hospital. They are expected to survive. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the U.S. during his speech before the UN today. He compared U.S. strikes in Syria and Iraq with Israeli attacks on Hamas and the Gaza Strip. However, he says Israel is still very concerned about Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Don't be fooled by Iran's manipulative charm offensive. It's designed for one purpose and for one purpose only: to lift the sanctions and remove the obstacles to Iran's path to the bomb.
Prime Minister Netanyahu went on to speak about security issues facing the world, comparing ISIS and Hamas to a cancer that must be removed before it's too late. Well, with midterms just a few weeks away now, lawmakers are trying to sell themselves and explain why the other side is wrong. Maryland's Steny Hoyer, a House Democrat, took his turn in Washington today.
In 5 short weeks, the American people will make a decision about the direction that they want this country to go. They're going to have to choose what kind of government they want. One characterized by endless gridlock, or one that achieves progress.
Hoyer addressed the differences between the Republicans and Democrats in Congress. He says he's optimistic Democrats will hold the Senate. They have a slim majority now, but Republicans are threatening to gain more seats, perhaps even full control of the Senate after Election Day. Chad Connolly is the Director of Faith Engagement for the Republican National Committee. They had the Voters' Values Summit. Did anything significant come out of that this weekend, Chad?
I think it's just a highlight that people care about values. They care about our leaders having those values, and I think it sees the inspiration that people have right now. They're excited, they're animated about this election, and they want to be a part of it.
Does this really have significance? I mean, is it just a political show, or is there real meat behind it?
I think there's a lot of meat behind it, Brian. I think what you see is, despite maybe what was tried to be foisted on the people years ago, character does matter, and people want to know that their leaders have a character and integrity behind them, and they can be reliable and trustworthy.
Just 35 days from now, voters will go to the polls. Do you think politicians are going to avoid these moral debates until then, or you think they'll jump into the fray?
Well, you know, a lot of the moral debates may not be on the top of the mind of people, but folks want to know where their leaders stand. And I've been in 31 states all over the place. I think congressmen like that probably ought to get out of D.C. a little bit and see what people are thinking, because people are upset about what's going on, and they realize their involvement is imperative, it's necessary, and maybe at a level like we haven't seen in a long, long time.
When we've talked before, you've said that people of faith didn't turn out as strong for Republicans in the last election. Why is that, and do you think that'll change this year?
Well, I sure hope so. I mean, that's what my job's all about. And you don't know if it's just last election or if it's just been kind of maybe a neglect over a long period of time. And our chairman, Reince Priebus, and a lot of us kind of recognize that maybe we need an all-hands-on-deck approach. When you lose elections, you start getting reflective and you say, what have we got to do better? And so we wanted to go back to the base. We want to talk to people of faith. This is the natural home for people of faith. I don't have to hang the Republican Party around my neck. If people will go vote the biblical values that they know in their hearts and they're reading in the Word, then I believe will come out okay, because this is the party that's the natural home for people of faith.
But this is politics. Don't you run the risk of alienating non-believers or even marginal Christians?
You know, I think the left has been pretty good at trying to get us to say you shouldn't be involved in this. But in a biblical worldview, you know, God's everywhere, He's nowhere at all. And so I believe that people think everybody's got some kind of core belief system. And those people respect that I got my belief and you have your belief, and we all ought to be involved in the process.
So a recent Pew poll suggests that more Americans want religion to be more involved in the political process. Why do you think that is?
I think they're just kind of looking for a way. You know, I lost my wife a few years ago and learned a lot of lessons, learned to trust in God and watch Him. But one of the big lessons I learned is my boys needed me. They needed my leadership. And I think people, when they see a lot of confusion, a lot of things that aren't fitting together, they're looking for leadership of their priest, their pastor, and other faith leaders. And I think that's why people are saying, yes, we ought to have spiritual values and religious values put back in the public arena. Maybe it's been out of there way too long and way too much.
There are people of all faiths voting. How do you reach out to these various denominations and even faiths of great diversity?
I mean, I'm talking to everybody who will talk right now. And I'm finding that there's a whole lot of low-hanging fruit, and it's every denomination, every stripe, every religious background, and I'm just trying to be out there. Like I said, I've been in a bunch of states, and I'm talking to leaders from every denomination I can to get them just to, hey, register all the people in the pews, make sure that you preach biblical values, and then talk to them about making sure you go and vote those values in the voting booth on November 4th.
You make a great case. The RNC's Chad Connolly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brian.
Well, some leading Democrats are already celebrating tonight, but not election results. The Clinton family is welcoming a new addition. Charlotte Clinton Mezvinsky was born from the former first daughter, Chelsea Clinton, and her husband on Friday night. Bill and Hillary Clinton said they're blessed, grateful, and so happy to become grandparents. Politically, this also could mean the former Secretary of State could be a step closer to run for the White House, or not. Mrs. Clinton has said she was waiting for her grandchild to arrive before making that decision. Coming up, the fight for political freedom continues in the streets of Hong Kong. And Madrid celebrates the beatification of Opus Dei's prelate, Blessed Alvaro del Portillo. On this Monday, September 29th, thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and thousands of protesters remain camped out in central Hong Kong tonight. They're defying the government's efforts to end ongoing rallies across the city. Wyatt Goolsby joins us now with more. Wyatt?
Brian, pro-democracy demonstrators are standing firm in Hong Kong, calling for China's central government in Beijing to loosen their grip on the city's elections.
Despite demands from authorities to disperse, waves of protesters continue to clog the city center in front of the government headquarters. Police have used tear gas and pepper spray to crack down on demonstrators who have filled downtown since last week.
I certainly will not be scared, and I've said it before and say it again. If I see a tank from the Chinese troops in Hong Kong, I will get myself a bicycle and stand right in front of it.
Protest leaders like Martin Lee say they won't go home until communist Beijing allows open nominations for Hong Kong's city leader.
As long as it takes. As long as there's one person that's still out here on this highway, I'm going to be here.
First of all, I don't think it affected our business. Secondly, even it's affected our business, I think it's worth it.
And the protests are not limited to Hong Kong. Protesters rallied in Taiwan today as a sign of support.
It's a big genie to put back in the bottle when you got people protesting like this.
Walter Lohman, an expert on foreign policy in Asia, says Catholics and other Christians make up a good number of people calling for more political and religious freedoms. He thinks it's more likely the government will crack down on those protesters before they reach a compromise.
But it could make them a little bit tougher on religion than they already are, because they know that ultimately, this is going to lead to people wanting more political freedom.
Today, the Hong Kong government canceled the city's annual fireworks show scheduled for Wednesday, which marks China's National Day. Likely, they're anticipating the protests to continue this week. Brian, more than 40 people have been hurt in the rallies.
All right, thank you, Wyatt. Pope Francis celebrated Mass with 40,000 elderly people on Sunday. It was a diverse audience, according to Vatican Radio. Elderly refugees from Iraq, married couples, single people, and clergy, including Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. In one of his rare public appearances, Benedict spent an hour in St. Peter's Square before Mass. Francis said he liked having Benedict nearby because it's like having the wise grandfather at home. The Pope also reflected on the struggle and the beauty of old age.
Old age, in particular, is a time of grace in which the Lord will renew his call. He calls us to preserve and transmit the faith.
The gathering was sponsored by the Vatican's Pontifical Council for the Family. It was planned to honor grandparents and the elderly, and also to pray for the upcoming Synod on the Family. Bishop Alvaro del Portillo, the prelate of Opus Dei for 20 years, is now one step away from sainthood. Tens of thousands attended the open-air Beatification Mass in Madrid on Saturday. Many believes this marks a new era of mainstream acceptance for the Opus Dei prelature following years of stigma. Last year, Pope Francis approved the miracle that's attributed to prayers through the intercession of Blessed Alvaro. That miracle involved a Chilean infant whose heart had stopped. His parents pleaded to Del Portillo to intercede to God on their baby's behalf. Today, the church celebrates the archangels, led, of course, by St. Michael. He is known as the angelic warrior who defeated Satan, banishing him to hell. Alan Holdren takes us to Rome, where images of the angels are everywhere.
All over Rome, they're visible. In St. Peter's, the Vatican museums, even atop this castle that carries their name. Angels. Father Mark Haydu is writing a book about the angels depicted in Vatican art.
Scripture says a lot, and so many of us have spiritual experiences with angels, with our guardian angels, with saints, with intercession, and so that whole area is really enlightened by our faith so much. Gabriel, Raphael, and Michael, they are the defenders, the messengers of God. Where are they? They're what makes them attractive. They're between heaven and earth.
Ahead of St. Michael's feast day, the Vatican police force was celebrating their patron this weekend.
Here inside the Vatican, just steps away from the Pope's residence, his personal security force looks to the angels, guided and guarded by them as they guard the Holy Father.
Somebody call us as guardian angels, but as I repeat every time, the true guardian angel is St. Michael and the other saints who protect the Pope, who protect the Church against the enemies.
So the Pope's protection is not just in the hands of men, but also in those of angels. In Rome, Alan Holdren EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Alan. The Vatican has posted a formal statement sharply criticizing the United Nations. It accuses the UN of making recommendations violating the Holy See's religious freedom. The remarks are in response to a February report by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. That committee insisted that the Vatican should globally enforce an international child rights treaty protecting against sexual abuse. The Vatican replied Friday that this would interfere with the sovereignty of other states. Up next, a woman who has made the journey from atheism to Catholicism discusses evangelizing other non-believers. On your Monday evening, thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and the Pontifical Council for Social Communication is explaining the theme of World Communications Day 2015. The day will be based around the Communicating the Family, a privileged place of encounter with the gift of love. The Council says the theme is to help us appreciate how much the family is good for society. It is so often depicted with all of its difficulties. Pope Francis's message for the day will come on January 24th. That is the feast of St. Francis of de Sales, the patron saint of journalists. Jennifer Fulwiler, author of Something Other Than God, is joining us. That book is her story of conversion from atheism to Catholicism. Jennifer, it's great to meet you in person. I wonder what your view of Catholicism was as an atheist.
Well, of course, I understood that it was a corrupt, immoral institution that was particularly bent on oppressing women.
So what stereotypes might we have of atheists that might even keep us from reaching out to them as Catholics?
You know, it's so easy when there's someone who is opposing you and what you believe to fall into stereotypes. In a way, it's easier to believe the people on the other side are just evil and don't care. And so I do see sometimes we tend to think that atheists might be immoral or, you know, not interested in doing good. And quite the opposite is true. Certainly the atheists I knew were very good, moral people. And it was actually very important to them to bring goodness into the world.
And if someone is going to oppose the idea of God, they almost already have the idea, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, they have some concept of God that at least is on their minds. You know, in some ways I have more hope for the vocal atheists than for the people who have just drifted into a functional atheism.
Pope Francis is big on reaching out to people of other faiths, and I'm sure people of no faith. What do you make of his approach?
You know what I love? What I love about his approach is that you see what God is doing with these two popes that we've had back to back. Because Pope Benedict wrote an enormous amount, this enormous volume of words that directly took down atheism from an intellectual perspective. And then God follows this with a pope who has a little bit more touchy-feely, more personal perspective of saying, oh, my brother, my sister, I so want you to be part of this church. And it's amazing, this 1-2 punch of the intellectual followed by the personal.
What do you think that we as the faithful can learn from our Holy Fathers?
That I think that what God is teaching us through these two wonderful popes is that you need both. We do need to understand how reasonable this faith is and that there's immense body of knowledge behind it, but that you can't have one without the other. We need that personal touch. We need to shower our lost loved ones with love and kindness and forgiveness.
So many of us have been blessed to be part of the Catholic Church all of our lives. What is it like for a person coming into the church new, and what challenges specifically did you face and might others face?
The challenge I faced when I first came into the church was loneliness. Coming from a completely secular social circles, when I became Catholic, I didn't know any Catholics. And trying to walk this walk of, you know, being a faithful Catholic and really swimming upstream, it's hard to do when you're alone. And so I think that isolation and loneliness are probably the biggest challenges that converts face.
So in light of that, what can you share with us that could help us to help people coming into the church?
You know, I might encourage our parishes when they're done with RCIA programs to have continuing programs, even if it's just a social gathering, even a once a month, you know, coffee and donuts or wine and cheese. I think that that would do a lot to help our converts who go through RCIA remain faithful Catholics.
And we as parishioners can do the same.
Absolutely.
Invite them into our circles. Finally, you blog at conversiondiary.com.
That's right.
How has that played into your role as a Catholic now?
You know, as you see in the book that I wrote, I actually blogged my way through conversion. I started my blog because being a loudmouth atheist doesn't leave you with a lot of Christian friends. So I thought, maybe I could find some Christians on the internet. And I have maintained that same blog to this day. And that, you know, we talked about loneliness and community. And that has really given me a great sense of community. And many of those people have actually become friends in real life.
Her book is Something Other Than God. Jennifer Fulwiler, thanks for being with us.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And a more in-depth interview with Jennifer can be seen on The World Over this week. Thanks for joining us tonight. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.